Hello, everybody. Thank you again for joining me on another episode of Regulatory Voices. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Zak Huang. Zak, thank you very much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
Perfect. Great. Before we get into today's topic, Zak, I think it'd be great to give the audience a bit of a background overview of your career and what you're doing these days before we go into everything. So over to you for a brief introduction.
Sure. Thank you so much, Connor. So I was trained as a physician in China and practiced medicine. And I moved to the United States about 30 years ago. And I started with clinical research, clinical development. And then in 2002, I had opportunity to switch career to regulatory affairs. And I've been loving it since.
Brilliant. In one of our few conversations, you described regulatory as something that felt very mysterious early on to you. What was your perception of regulatory before you actually got started in it?
Oh, good question, Connor. Yes, actually, at the time I was asked to switch to regulatory affairs, I was scared
Hmm.
because my understanding and impression of regulatory affairs was that time, number one, people in regulatory affairs know everything,
Hmm.
they handle everything, they fix everything, every single decision for everybody. And also they have to be able to understand, memorize all regulations. And so they almost like they play I feel that they play a very authoritative role.
Hmm. And I think if we look at your journey, I think it makes sense to start at the beginning as someone who is quite unique. You started from China, practicing medicine, moving into clinical research in the US, then transitioning to regulatory in an unexpected way. And what stood out from our conversation was how your understanding of regulatory evolved over time from something quite operational to something broader and more strategic. So, my first question to kind of kick everything off would be if someone asked you today, what is your story in regulatory? How would you describe that journey?
Yeah. So I think Connor, if I may, I would split that into two parts.
Go ahead.
One is how I started my journey in regulatory affairs. And secondly is that I would rephrase the question like that. If somebody asked me, say, Zach, how can I get into regulatory affairs? So I would answer that question. How about that?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So how did I get into regulatory affairs? At that time, I thought it's just by chance. But looking back, I said, well, actually, there's a reason because I think that I had first I left a company, a device company,
Mhm,
and joined a big pharma that time, and I did not burn a bridge.
mhm,
And so my former manager, Steve McQuillan, and then he contacted me, said, well, Zach, how about regulatory affairs? Would you like to come back?
mhm,
And so that time I was scared, but I thought, well, gee, I never thought about it. This
mhm,
could be a real career development opportunity. So I
mhm,
took that as a kind of stepping stone for the future, something I even did not know very well.
mhm,
Because I thought, well, that time in medical device industry, not many people had medical or clinical background.
mhm,
I thought, well, I can bring some additional value. And also, I also told myself, hey, there's a plan B,
mhm.
or I can fall back. If I failed regulatory affairs and then I switch to clinical, I can always, quote unquote, claim my short regulatory experience.
Sure.
And guess what? A couple of months after I switched to regulatory affairs, I told my wife why I did not think about it sooner. So I think I'm sure this does not tell anybody because this is just my experience. But retrospectively, I do think about how I got into regulatory affairs or what attributes Steve McQuillan, my former manager, saw that in me. And so I think that to get into regulatory affairs, yes, of course, you can take some courses and get some degree, training, special training. But most importantly, is that somebody who has the ability and also demonstrated the ability Number one, to go beyond science,
Hmm.
to own the issue, to take the leadership role, drive the decision, and tell the story. And so it's really about that the leadership, ownership, problem solving, and communication. So I
Hmm.
think that whoever wants to get into regulatory affairs, before you do that, I think that they need to ask this question or pay attention to develop and demonstrate those skills.
Yeah. I think what you said there is quite good though, Zach, because your story, whilst it's unique to you, it
Yeah.
has some similar beats to other people, which is you weren't actively looking for regulatory and you had this preconceived notion of what it was. And you kind of fell into it. And then once you were in it, it became this thing that you fell in love with. A
Yes.
lot of people have that same thing. They're not, yes, you can do a course and you can be taught this is what is regulatory, but a
Mhm.
lot of people start out on the bench or the FDA or a
Mhm.
clinical or physician background, and then find their way in it. So it's your unique story, but a lot of people have found themselves just finding their way into regulatory.
Yes.
And something that
Exactly.
I want to follow that up with is
Mhm.
you mentioned about your idea of regulatory and knowing all these guidelines. At what point did your thinking shift from following regulations to seeing regulatory as something more strategic and creative?
Yeah. Excellent question, Connor. Yes. So my view of regulatory affairs, my understanding and how I do or practice regulatory affairs
Yeah.
e- evolved over time. And also it's kind of gradual process. I cannot pinpoint, oh, this is the point. I completely changed. Yes, there were some events, steps that helped me have better understanding, or
Hmm.
there's many aha moments. But I think that the my journey is that I started with regulatory affairs, knowing that it will doing submissions,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
will handle agency interactions, right? And
Yeah.
also to do that, I need to read the regulations, I need to find precedents, and also I need to communicate and listen to authorities, right? But then soon I found out, well, it did not work well always
Yeah. Yeah.
because very often the regulations are so vague, it
Hmm.
doesn't covers. It doesn't cover everything. And also, there are not many precedents. In fact, I have to say that, Connor, I think that that's a fun part of regulated affairs. You don't want to just follow the precedents. And so that's why I start thinking, well, do I, and also internally, initially, I was just doing whatever function or team told me to do, right? And also, I expect myself to have the answer for that because, yes, in the company, it happens very often.
Hmm.
Many functions, teams, they tend to throw the issue to regulatory affairs. Whenever there's something not, they cannot find the answer, let's ask regulatory affairs. So I expected myself to have the answer all the time, but then I said, well, no, I do not have the answer. And so that's why I start thinking, well, what what exactly role I want to play
Hmm.
instead of just telling or following anything else I can do. And I start basically experiment everything and found what is best way to have a better understanding for myself and among ourselves. And then I found, well, you know what? Asking question actually may be a good approach.
Hmm.
Make sure that I understand the issue and also make sure that the team understand the issue, understand what the best approach would be. So
Hmm.
that's a switch. And the next step is that since, of course, initially I said, well, should I ask the question because I did not understand the science because I was not trained in their specific area. But then once I got comfortable asking those questions, and I said, well, you know what? Not just ask clarification question. I really should ask some challenging questions.
Hmm.
So start challenging the team, challenging their assumptions, challenging their rationale. because only if we can defend our assumptions ourselves, then we can convince the regulators. So that's a switch.
It's funny what you were saying there about the creative part of it. Most of regulatory there is a new element to it every time. Regulatory affairs, especially clinical strategy, isn't cookie cutter. You can't, what worked for that doesn't work for this one. Everything has a nuance to it, or it's an entirely new, novel approach, and there is no precedent, and you've got to play in the grey area. And we're going to talk about that a bit later on. But before we go into that area, I want to tell the people a story that you told me, something that I really enjoyed. You told me about a moment early in your career where you were involved in a discussion with the FDA on a device program, and it could have been delayed by years. Can you walk me through what happened there and what you did differently?
Sure. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Connor. I think they're remembering that story. I think this was 20 years ago, actually, specifically as a 2003.
Mm-hmm.
And I was in a medical device company. The product is implantable defibrillator. So the device implanted in your body, monitor your heart rate, and then whenever your heart rate go crazy, we call that arrhythmia, and then it would deliver electric shock. And so that time, the device requires software within the device and also what we call the firmware, and the machine outside the body communicate with the body. And so the device was made, the software firmware, we call this the software in the external device as firmware. Both software and firmware were all validated, verified, and then there's a specific feature called heart rate variation. And then that was very new concept because there have been publication that the change in the heart rate variation and the trend of the change may indicate the risk of having a heart failure. So that so-called feature was developed to say, well, the heart rate variation could help physician understand the risk of heart failure. So FDA received the package, and then at the very end, towards the very end of the review cycle, FDA contacted us. So we cannot approve your application because you have this feature called heart rate variation. You have no clinical data, and also that you are not, because of no clinical data, you are not telling physician, the patient, what exactly this feature does, or what kind of confidence the physician should have. And therefore, you need to remove this function, the feature, from the device. And that would be a huge setback for the company because they have to redevelop this software, firmware, or have that blocked and then do a lot of testing. That would cause huge delay. But then FDA was right because there's not much clinical data to prove that. So we got stuck there. And so this is time, I think that my medical background helped me. I said, well, okay, fine, we got stuck here. Understand this feature doesn't have clinical evidence to support whatever claim, but how we can do something to still keep this feature but then still have some so-called clinical utility there. So people understand what exactly this does. So I came up with this idea, said, well, how about this, FDA? We change the description of this feature. Instead of saying, well, this is the predictor of the heart failure, the risk of heart failure, we say heart rate variation is a mathematic calculation of the change of heart over time. So we just state that. And then FDA accepted. And then what the company did is they just reprint the manual. They just reprint the fact without change of the design, manufacturing, everything, so that the product was approved in the time fashion and launch time fashion. In fact, I think that now every day everybody just look up your smartphone for the health feature heart. There's
Yeah.
heart rate variation there. So I think this is story says it's not about the presidents. It's not about that. Well, if we just let FDA or regulator make a decision, it's really about being creative and also being practical and thinking
Yeah.
about what exactly we can deliver to the patient, the physician, and also what exactly we tell them. For example, the device, this function does.
It's a great story, and I think it really highlights the back and forth between agency and regulatory, and
Mhm.
how at the end of the day you have two parties who are trying to see a product through, but trying
Mhm.
to make sure that all the appropriate language and guardrails are there. And it's just all about listening to each other. And
Yeah.
a question I have for you is, you've described regulatory as being about asking and answering the question why, and not just trying to push submissions through. And that story kind of hinted at that a little bit as well. How did the realization, how did that realization change the way you approached your role?
Yeah. Yeah. So the 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 yes, at this time I explained regulatory affairs is asking question why. The fact is that I did not come to this point clearly articulate this point until like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So think about I started basically my regulatory affairs has been like over 25 years. So for the
Yeah.
first 15 years, I struggled or I did something without knowing that clearly. And because yes, as I said, the regulatory affairs, we do a lot what and how
Hmm.
at what kind of regulatory procedures we're going to take, what to include, or what to include in the package, everything, and how we do that, how we conduct, how we plan the regulatory activities, how we communicate with agencies, how we get the internal alignment. And then gradually I realized that, yes, those are the important regulatory activities and focus. And then, in fact, the driver underneath those questions should be why. For example, why the cross-function team should take this path for a specific development issue,
Hmm.
and why we think that the rationale, the supportive evidence would be convincing, right? And also that once we put everything together, why regulators would agree with us.
Hmm.
And most importantly, why physicians would love to, a physician and patient would like to use this product and follow the instruction. And so and once I got this point, I said, oh, I should ask the why question more often. And then everything became clear because with the why question, we would be able to have more disciplined cross-functional decision or discussion and decision making.
Hmm.
And also, we would be able to align on the issues because we all understand why, right? And also that we will have consistent communication discussion with the regulators externally,
Hmm.
and also go back to the submissions and meeting procedures, and then we would be able to develop a robust narrative of the regulatory storytelling communication. So I think that's my take of regulatory affairs is really to always think about why, not just
Hmm.
what and how.
And before we go on to the next topic, I want to kind of look a bit at your journey and your experience you've got. And you've spoke about how you've been leveraging your medical and clinical background to
Mhm.
create impact early on. How important was that in helping you stand out and progress in your career?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I stand up, but I think that my medical clinical background does help me tremendously. The personal experience practicing medicine and taking care of patients, that helped me say, well, always think about that. If I were still practicing, number one, would I prescribe this medicine to my patients? And when I prescribe this one, what I'm going to tell the patients. So I would have the expectation of the product labeling. And so if I was still practicing and I read the product labeling indication, everything there, what kind of question I would have, right? So then I would ask, well, we need the non-clinical, clinical evidence. So I think that really helped. And of course, not to mention that patient focus, the passion. Also, I understand not everybody in regulatory affairs has the medical clinical background. And the way I talk to others, I say, well, yes, I understand you were not a physician, but then the question you can ask is, would you recommend this product to your mother? Right? Knowing everything, what are you going to tell? When you recommend this drug to your mother, what are you're going to tell her, right? So this is not about the registration, but also clinical development, right? So if we have the compound going through from phase 2 to phase 3, and then a friend or relative of yours could be enrolled in the study, would you recommend this person be enrolled? Yeah. So always think about that impact, safety, efficacy, impact. I think that helps.
One thing I want to pivot onto is your view of regulatory. And one of the most memorable things that you said to me before was that you no longer see yourself as a scientist or a physician, but as an artist, and that regulatory itself is an art. And we've discussed increasingly about how regulatory is about storytelling, shaping a narrative, aligning stakeholders around that story. What do you mean when you say regulatory is an art?
Correct. Yeah. So yeah, I do claim that I'm no longer a physician. I'm not a scientist. I'm an artist. The reason I said that is that because for a regulatory affairs professional in the company working with cross-function team, we typically do not own the science directly. We do not own the data, but we are asked to be part of the data interpretation, to be part of the planning of the next step. So that requires the skills of data analysis, interpretation, and storytelling. And also that the regulatory affairs does not work in isolation. And we need to influence others internally, externally. We need to hold everybody's hand. That requires also collaboration, negotiation, alignment. Everything I'm talking about is an art. The reason I said art is that art is not just about that, only about the content. It's really about how you bridge, how you communicate, how you have a effective impact on your audience. So that's why I call it regulatory as an art.
Yeah, and I agree with it. It's a great term because I do think there is the creativity aspect of regulatory is something that doesn't quite get acknowledged as much. And it is creative. You know, it does involve negotiation. It's on the spot. It's trying to take yourself out of a tunnel vision approach, take other ideas. And I think a key part of that, and you said it before, is the importance of building a robust story. What does that actually mean in the context of regulatory strategy? And you've already kind of hinted it a little bit there, but if you could put that in your own words.
Yeah. So I think Connor, you're right. The key is the robust regulatory story. The regulatory's role is not just sit on the sideline waiting for the final report and then we put together assembling a submission, that would not typically would not be able to, we would not be able to tell a robust story.
Mm-hmm.
So to be able to tell a robust story, starting point again, asking why. At the very beginning of the process, even before we started non-clinical CMC or clinical development, ask those questions, what exact issues we need to address?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of gaps we see? Or what kind of hurdles we was run into? Or what kind of pushback regulators may have? And then identify those gaps, challenges, through asking why questions, and then help team develop a comprehensive development plan. And regulatory is part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that point, we start, not only we have a good plan, but also we have the confidence. If we do everything, we'll be able to tell a comprehensive, robust story.
Mm-hmm.
This is one. Two is that once we get the data, there's always surprise. And also, well, how we can still put everything together. Is there anything else we can add to justify, to enhance our story? And this is also time we will say, well, with the new findings, what kind of additional questions regulators may have or physician patient may have? And so be proactive and either come up with additional justification or some modification. Sometimes is modification is that, well, in terms of, yes, we will have this drug used as this dose level. We may want to change dose level, or we may want to change something, still be able to deliver the treatment. And so predicting issues, challenges that, and also be proactive, that would help to deliver a robust story.
Something you said on our last call, which I think links to all of this really well, is you mentioned that a strong regulatory strategy makes it unreasonable for anyone reasonable to disagree.
Mm-hmm.
How do you actually get to that point in practice?
Yeah. Let me just go a little bit further. So at the early stage of my regulatory career, this is time I joined Merck. My supervisor, Bob Silverman,
Mm-hmm.
he taught me tremendously. And then I remember within our first conversation, he said, well, Zach, regulatory is just common sense. I was shocked. To hear that. I said, what are you talking about? I tried so hard, or everybody tries so hard getting regulatory affairs, and you said it's just common sense. And then a couple of years later, I was attending a conference. I talked to a very seasoned FDA reviewer, and he said something. In fact, what you just quoted is not the words or the statement I created. Actually, that person, he said, well,
Okay.
he said, well, a good regulatory submission is that it would make unreasonable for anybody who's reasonable to disagree with you. And I said, oh, this is something right. So then I just remember that, and also that they have that kind of incorporated in my thinking and practice. And so then I said, well, just to say the simple, I always share with my team. So, well, if we do this, if we present this data, if we make this conclusion, is there a chance regulators would disagree with us? And then if yes, and how we can make it harder for the regulator to disagree with us. Or even if they disagree with, can we set the stage so the regulator will explain and tell us why they disagree with us? And that would help us to come up with the follow actions.
I mean, yeah, it's the whole thing, really, isn't it? It's
Common sense.
it's common sense. It's telling the story. It's if it sounds good and everything's logical, it shouldn't be that hard to follow along. And I think that's where you go back to what you say about having that robust story. If it's robust enough, you've questioned it, you've asked why at every point, and you're telling that story. You tell it consistently through the journey. By the time you get to the submission, it should be smooth sailing. In a perfect world, sometimes it's not, but
Yeah.
but it's a good point.
Exactly. If I can add something, telling robust story is not that always we just stick to our point. Telling robust story also includes that offering reasonable alternatives.
Yeah.
Because very often, and the regulators, their job is to tell us what they do not feel comfortable, what they do not agree. And then we got stuck because that's a rejection. But it's not regulators' job to tell the company how to get out of it. So I think telling robust story also include that develop and offer alternatives, reasonable alternatives.
Just like your device story. You already had an alternative and it made sense and it was logical and it worked. Something that I wanted to dive into as we go into the later half of this interview is your enthusiasm and focus on leadership, and specifically how leadership and regulatory can be quite different to other functions. You described regulatory as fundamentally a leadership role, particularly because it relies on influencing others rather than owning everything directly, which makes sense given the cross-functional nature of it. So my first question on this piece will be, how do you define leadership within regulatory affairs?
Yeah. Again, I think in my early years of regulatory affairs, looking back, I feel, you know what? I've been pushed around because I was just doing the team told me what to do. And then I said, gee, no, regulatory is a powerful position, right? So I should tell team what to do, right? That did not work well either. And then I realized, so you know what? Regulatory, we have to hold everybody's hand. And also that you really have to influence others, despite the fact that the other functions do not necessarily reporting to regulatory affairs, right? And so I think that the thinking that having that lens to look at everything, I think that really helped. And so then I think this is my kind of the if I can get advice to anybody, it's really that the focus on influence and collaboration, and also the focus on integration. And how to do that is really, I think that number one is that we have to ask ourselves what regulatory affairs has enabled, right? And so that I would say that in three parts. One is that to elevate thinking. Do our questions, regulatory question, internal questions, help the team think differently? And also that another one is that about the decision making. Have we made the decision making more disciplined, more enriched? And third one is that it's not that regulatory affairs tells other functions, oh, this is not sufficient, this is not robust. It's really, have we helped the other functions to be more capable? Because after all, we have to work with all functions so they can have a better program design and outcome. So the key question is, is the team being able to do something better because of regulatory affairs? So that's why I think that's what I think we need to think about the leadership role.
So is that what you mean by enabling leadership? Giving
Correct.
people that platform, but be able to stand for themselves. Okay, that makes sense. And you spoke about three key elements there, which is elevating thinking, removing obstacles, and building capability in people. How do these show up day to day in how you personally lead teams? Is it more of a cultural thing as opposed to a process thing? Is it something that you can't necessarily put in place? It's something that you build in the background and it provides that feeling?
Yeah, it's a more mindset. It's a
Okay.
more mindset. It's that I do not think that's kind of the a recipe. So, oh yes, Zach, if you do this, that would be the leadership. That will be enabling leadership. It's really that. For example, I ask myself that what exactly value I'm adding. Yeah, and also that another way I'm doing that, I always remind myself three things: engagement. Am I engaged? Am I actively engaging with the team, program, everything? And
Hmm.
then I ask the second question, do I have any contributions? And the third one is hard, is that what kind of impact I'm making. So I
Hmm.
think that it's always thinking about that the value impact. And then the way I'm thinking that is, oh, you know what? The best way for me to do that is that to have some enabling leadership.
And you mentioned a little bit earlier that regulatory doesn't actually own everything, but it
Mm.
relies heavily on other functions to do its role.
Yes.
How does that shape the way you lead compared to more traditional leadership roles?
Yeah. So that's exactly the reason I think we need to have that kind of the enabling leadership.
Hmm.
See, uh, it's impossible for anybody to know everything about the development for a new product. I have not seen anybody. For regulatory affairs, we need to understand. We have the ability to dive deep in a specific issue, but then since we do not have that the training background and the skills, necessary skills, experience, we're not in the position actually find a scientific solution. But the regulatory role is that number one, to help the team identify the gap and to predict how regulators and physicians, patients would react, and then reframe the question in terms of that whether or not this will be accepted. We reframe that is that what key issues we need to address. What key issues can be addressed with the current science technology?
Hmm.
What issue cannot be addressed by the science technology but can be addressed by some others approach? For example, risk management plan. For example, specific labeling of the language or the change of they have some restriction or for clinical study change of the inclusion exclusion criteria. And so reframe the question. I think that is the way to for regulatory affairs work with each functions and play a different role to facilitate the
Hmm.
team thinking and discussion and coming to a solution.
I think that's a really good way of putting it because as someone, like myself, working in recruitment, I'm speaking to people at different levels all the time.
Uh-huh.
And whilst my specialism is regulatory, I've also worked in quality,
Uh-huh.
clinical operations, biostats, and clinical development. And sometimes you have to pretty often have to tailor the story you want to tell to each
Yes.
individual because they have different cares and different passions. And I imagine in a regulatory sense, if you're the person whose job it is to get the data from all of these groups, they want to hear something from you that's relevant to them. They might not necessarily want to hear what someone else is saying because they only have their view of things. So I think it makes complete sense. You have to be mindful of who you're actually speaking to
Yeah,
and what you can do for them to make sure they feel fulfilled in their role. And that's probably a great way of making people feel like they're heard and listened to as well, which is, I think, is a big thing. People need to feel like they're being listened to.
exactly. Exactly.
Something that I wanted to kind of ask you about on your personal story
Mhm.
is as someone who has made that journey from switching into regulatory and made the way up to the level you are now at VP, SVP, is there a moment in your career where you felt you truly stepped into leadership, where you felt, I get this now, it makes more sense to me?
Yes, there have been a few moments I felt
Hmm.
that way. Those moments came exactly at the time after I asked the right question, asked those why questions. And the moment all the time, actually it's time, not only I helped the team, but also I drew and facilitated the process of the integrated discussion and for the team come up with the not just robust story, but also, for example, to start develop a playbook and develop a storyline. I think that is time. Not only I feel that, I am playing a leadership role, but also that is the moment gave me tremendous sense of satisfactory. It's not about submission. It's not about approval. Because I think that at the moment, everything's done. Not what you can do. Yes, you have the negotiation, everything, right? You still have change. But I think that the regulatory leadership role, it is more important to play that role in the development phase. Not regulatory affairs should not wait on the sideline and just having team deliver the reports and put that in submissions.
And a follow-up to that would be, what do you think separates a good regulatory leader from a great one?
I think that what would separate them is that how you see yourself. I think that a great regulatory leaders would be invisible during each steps because they ask the why questions. They do a lot of things enabling others. And then in the end, everybody realizes that, we will not be able to achieve this without this person's leadership. But then when you look at each steps, that's not this person's role may not be so visible.
I think it's a great point. I mean, as someone myself who's a big football or I should say soccer fan for the US, a lot of the time you can have, really great players who are scoring, all the goals. But a lot of the times the leaders, the guys who actually make the team click are the silent ones, the ones who keep the structure in place, the ones who enable others to actually play at their top performance. And I think what you said there, I agree with completely. I think some of the best leaders are the ones that aren't necessarily the most vocal, the ones who give the right structures and the right platforms for people to be them best selves, but to challenge them in a way that isn't too confrontational and allows them to grow. And so what you said there about the enabling leadership and the silenceness of being a good leader, and also when you are active, feeling like the person's being heard, I think I agree with those three things wholeheartedly. I believe that completely. Something that I wanted to talk to you about as we come to the last few questions here is something you said that stuck with me. You said earlier in your career you were focused more on proving yourself rather than impact. And that's something that I feel like I did a lot as well. I was just trying to prove myself and show that I was capable and that I could be doing these things. So for yourself, what changed in your mindset to shift towards focusing on impact as opposed towards just proving to yourself that you can do this? That's a big shift.
Yeah, and also that's a very, very deep question.
Mhm.
I'm going to give you a very deep answer, very personal answer. I think that
Right.
in short, is that it's really how I handle the sense of insecurity. Because early in my career and also early in my life, I struggled with the sense of security. So I always not only try to improve myself, but also I always try to demonstrate
Mhm.
my ability. And then later on I said, well, yes, that's good. But then the regulatory role is not that tell others how good we are in terms of putting the submission or the and also they get the interactions with the regulators. It's really that what values we add, right? And to do that, I need to sit back. So the way I told myself is that just like a basketball game. Of course, I said regulatory affairs, we typically, rarely we own some contents. I mean, scientific technical contents. So for the basketball game, we're not going to play on the court and shoot baskets. So early stage, I was trying to play a role as a referee, blow the whistle. Okay, stop. This is right. That did not work well. And then I realized, regulatory affairs or my role should be a coach or assistant coach, help the team understand our strength, weakness, and also develop strategy and also improve or enhance some skills, something like that. And to do that, I need to be able to be comfortable with my role to do that. And then also I need to overcome that sense of insecurity. And once I feel that, you know what, I should be comfortable working with the team and have confidence in the team ability to do their job, but then also I give them not guidance, but I help them identify the gaps and also setting the direction. That works well. So I think that in short is that what changed is that they handle the sense of insecurity.
I appreciate the personal reply and the personal answer to it, because it is something that I think most people who are going through their career and find themselves in these leadership positions.
Mhm.
And I think it's something people do, especially for me. My first 10 years post university was just constantly trying to prove that I could do this and I'm good at my job. And there's a sense of, insecurity or imposter syndrome or anxieties and that sense of security. So I appreciate the personal reply to it, because I think it's something that a lot of people go through and maybe don't necessarily speak about. So I really appreciate that, Zach.
Thank you. Yes.
Unfortunately, we are at the end of the interview. So
Okay.
what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you some quick fire questions as we wrap things up, okay?
Sure.
My first question to you is, what career advice do you wish you had received earlier?
Yeah. So first, not have any limit. Sky is the only limit. And also that they try to embrace all opportunities and use that opportunity to build a stepping stone for your future, even though you may not know the direction of your future.
Great answer. The second question, if we were to have this conversation again in 10 years' time, what do you think will have changed the most in regulatory affairs?
Oh, Connor, that's a very tough question. Can I say that I do not have the answer? Everything changed so fast. I think that in fact, I don't think my answer would change. I think that just still think about the leadership role and what value you are adding to the program, product, and progress. And how you do that may change.
Okay. And lastly, what part of working in regulatory affairs do you enjoy the most?
The strategy develop the storyline.
That's everything. Thank you very much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time, and I hope you had a good time on the call.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Connor. I really enjoy it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And for everyone watching, I hope you enjoyed the episode. As usual, the report will go up a day after this one goes out. This will go up on LinkedIn and all other platforms. If you have any questions for myself or Zach, put them in the comments or connect with Zach on LinkedIn and send him a message. I'm sure he'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. But for now, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you on the next episode.